All right. Well, what a day it is. My friend Mark is back on the Beyond Sunday podcast. Mark, you've been a previous guest. Always appreciate our chats. And Shannon is here, a new friend. Both of these guys are from Worship Leader Research. Welcome to the show today. How are we doing?
Super good. Yeah. Thanks for
Yeah.
having us. Yeah. It was awesome.
Amazing. Guys, let's start with this. Why does Worship Leader Research exist?
Oh, that's actually a question that I could probably help answer. So worship leader research exists because once upon a time, a few of us were, once upon a time, a few of us were doing some research about the life curves of worship songs. And so I can't remember, David, if that's actually what we popped on to talk about. This would have been probably 5 years ago if it was. So the idea was, hey, how long do songs, or how quickly do songs rise? How long do they stay at the top? And then how quickly do they fall? That's the kind of the life curve of a worship song. And so myself and a guy named Mike Tapper, we did some research into that. And while we were kind of talking about that, we ended up encountering some people who were smarter than us and who had been doing a lot of their own kind of independent research into things related to worship worship leaders and how they think about songs in particular. And so Shannon, who is with us today, that's one of those very same people. And also Adam Perez, who's at Belmont University, and Elias Dummer, who I bet you Elias has been on this podcast before. Has Elias been on the podcast before?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yep.
those people, so over time, all through independent kind of conversations, we realized that we had a bit of a kind of a synchronicity in how the things we were interested in. And so the kind of the governing question that, because we all, we're looking at a slightly different angles of it, but really the question was, how do worship leaders, how do they think about the quote unquote industry? What do they think about really one of the governing questions at the very beginning was, how do they react to what we perceived to be the overwhelming amount of worship songs that seem to be coming across their plates when it comes to whether it's by email promotions from certain unnamed companies, or whether it just means, through the social media feed, or whether it just means the algorithm that they happen to hit when they go on Spotify or Apple Music, or whether it means, they're, God bless them, congregants who are daily or so sending them email requests for this particular song. How do they feel about just the amount of content? And so that question snowballed into a bunch of other questions, which snowballed into, well, let's ask them. So we did a survey, and that has spun off into years of trying to assess what the results of those surveys were. And then just last year, or actually just a few months ago, wrapping up our second survey. And so what's kept us together is just, the fact that people seem to be actually interested in, it seems, the results of these queries of ours.
Yeah, I'm finding with the work that I do with Beyond Sunday is there are people that kind of enjoy systemic conversations. Like, let's talk about the way things are, the way spiritual things kind of play out in the real world, the actual data. But there's also some people that are really uncomfortable with that conversation because it feels like you're attacking my favorite worship artist, right? Or you're attacking my experience of God. Shannon, I don't know if you have any insight on this, but do you guys have critics? And if you do, like, what are those critics saying about your research?
Yeah. I feel like anyone that exists in the world that puts anything out into the public sphere has critics,
Yeah.
because everyone just always has something to say. But what I think is interesting about our research is whether it's the survey or some of the other just facts that we have about the worship music industry is our job is to always just kind of present facts and analyze them a little bit. And I think what's funny is we always have everyone speaking at what we're doing from every angle. We've got the people who are like spearing us on of like, thank you for this research, whether that's like, thank you for highlighting the, evils of the industry, or it's thank you for doing this research. We think it's really important that people just know what exists. So I think it's interesting just to see like all the different angles that people approach our research from, whether that's positive or negative. But yeah, I think anyone that puts anything out into the public sphere, there's always going to be somebody that has something negative to say about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, comment sections on social media, they're something else. I know you guys released a reel about your recent article that we're going to talk about, and I was looking at it for a while there, and some of those reactions were quite interesting. You know, um, so the recent article you guys put together worships mostly male power players, the rise of the songwriting family. We're going to dive into this. I find this so fascinating. But I wanted us to back up a little bit and talk about the 2010s. So either of you can take this. But I want you to highlight for us what are some of the worship, songwriting, worship leader trends that you found in the 2010s? And then from there, we'll kind of head into the 2020s. But let's talk about the 2010s first. What are some of those trends?
Yeah, so the 2010s, that was actually what our first article that we ever released was about. One of the things that we found with the research was the rise of what a lot of people who use worship music already kind of knew, that these four churches, these four mega churches, which we've come to name the Big Four, so that's Bethel, Hillsong, Elevation, and Passion, that these four churches were the primary contributors of pretty much every song that was in the CCLI Top 25 and the Praise Charts Top 25. So when we look at that list, the trends that we saw was that whether it was written and released by one of those churches or co-written with someone from one of those groups, they all kind of linked back to just four churches, really. And so that was one of the big things that we highlighted, which again wasn't necessarily revolutionary for anyone who's familiar with this music, but we were kind of one of the first people to just like put a highlight on that and name that for anyone who wasn't aware that these four churches were kind of shaping a lot of music that was coming out during that time, in the 2010s in particular. So that was like the big trend. The other thing that we highlighted, in addition, which I think is just interesting, and maybe we'll come back to it, but just how the industry as a whole shaped how music came to like, or was like promoted and given to churches as an option, was through singles. So one of the other trends we saw is
Mm.
that since 2017, every song that appeared in the CCLI Top 25 was released as a single. So not only were the music that we were primarily seeing used in churches coming from the Big Four were more or less kind of pre-selecting which of their songs they really wanted churches to sing, which, a lot of artists do that. But between the Big Four being kind of the prominent contributors, we also saw that they were also the primary advertisers for their own songs in a way, at least since 2017, for the ones that we were seeing being used by churches a lot.
What was a lot of online fodder for people to kind of be like, you guys don't know what you're talking about, kind of a comment was people in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 engaging with the content that we released about the 2010s and saying, but what about, and what about, and just like not realizing
Right.
that it's like, it said right at the beginning that we're talking about the previous decade. And this part of
This
the
is
problem with
history.
analytics is it can kind of take a while to get there, but also analytics take a while to analyze. And then also the content, though, when you put it out there, it lives on. And so we actually just, I don't know if this for sure, but I've had it shared with me about 3 or 4 times. I bet you Shannon's had it shared with her a number of times as well. Was this a clip that was just released earlier on this week? Jackie Hill Perry talking about this information that she stumbled across, which is that all of the songs written, I'm misquoting her, which is of course the very problem. But basically saying that all the worship songs that people sing are from these. She actually says from 5 churches. And so, is it likely that she is somehow regurgitating slightly skewed data that we ourselves released from the past? I would say so. And it's also not exactly true anymore. And this is what we, in some of our content, we're talking about now. But it's interesting how that stuff kind of lives on, and how people, like, it's very clear that she says it like this is a negative thing, right? The idea that that there's such a small group of people, in her perception, that are producing this content for churches. This is a negative thing, right? Like, and we actually don't
Yep.
say that. This is the problem. We don't say that. We just let you know this is what seems to be happening in terms of like the charts and the way that people are reporting, primarily but not exclusively in North America. when they're reporting what they're singing on Sunday mornings, this looks like the trend is that it was from a very narrow set of churches or whatever. So anyway, I cut you off, but I just wanted to say like this stuff it is living on in our memory for sure. But
Yeah. Well, and just to that point a little bit, Mark, I think to her credit, I think she was doing what I think we hope that people do with our research is that they take it and talk
of
about
course,
it. And I think that's, kind of what we've seen and what I think a lot of the hope for our research is that it's a conversation
Mhm,
starter. Because as Mark said, we didn't say it was a bad thing. We just said this is the
mhm,
reality. And then our hope is that people take that and that they do react to it and respond to it by talking about what that
mhm,
means in their own
mhm,
context for themselves.
Yeah. I think it's almost impossible to have these conversations without a large percentage of people making moral judgments. I mean, it's not like you're titling things like Phil Wickham is a power hungry capitalist, like it's that would sort of be this explicit like critique of like this is evil and this is wrong. You're looking at data and you're saying this is just what is happening. And how do we wrestle with this? You can come to different conclusions with it. I want to
mhm,
back up just the whole idea of a big four, right? Everybody
mhm.
knows there's a big four. But I wonder if throughout sort of modern worship history, you guys have any insight into sort of the rise of worship superpowers and why that happens. Why Bethel and Hillsong and Elevation and Passion sort of become this prominent, movement that everybody looks to and sort of pulls their resources from. How does that happen historically? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of the thing that we try to do is, I mean, obviously, we're going to it's a podcast conversation. We're going to have some thoughts, right? And actually, Shannon and I might have
Right.
different thoughts. This is how this works. But we always with worship related research, we're always trying our best to get back to the actual data itself. And so, part of the
Right.
initial survey, it asked people about how they felt about these brands by saying, using the word brand in a non-pejorative sense, but like, you know, Bethel Church, Elevation Church, how likely are you to choose songs that come from these particular churches? And it was really polarizing. This is the amazing thing about it is that is not everybody. Almost part of the issue is, of course, is it's not a necessarily always a representative sample. This is part of the challenge that you do have. Is it hard to say because it's like a lot of people, for example, a lot of people said that they would not choose Bethel songs, and yet the data suggested that tons and tons of people were leading Bethel songs, and so it's like,
Yep.
what does this what does this mean, right? Um, so, but then we also delved into the comments. So it's there's the numerical values of what on a 1 to 10 kind of what's that scale called again? Shannon, there's like a scale that you can choose between. Anyway, it doesn't matter. One of these graded scale things. There's so many different kind of ways that people can, you've all done surveys, right? Um, but then there's comments that you're also able to say. And so when you kind of take a look at what they're saying in response to you start to kind of read between the lines. And so one of the presuppositions that we went into was there's probably, to your point, David, there's probably this idea that people have a bit of an aspirational aspect to when they choose songs. So when people choose
Yep.
songs, they're not just choosing the melodies and the chord patterns, and to be honest, the theology or the lyrics,
Theology.
right? They're kind of choosing what's the experience going to be like, right? Like what will my Sunday morning experience be like? And so one of the things that we theorized was that, and this is kind of before we even got the data, was that a lot of people want their Sunday morning experience to be like the Sunday morning experiences that they see at these
Yeah.
mega churches. So they're hoping that the energy that they capture, and that they're able to kind of steward and then lead in their own local contexts would match the energy of the YouTube videos, um, whether that's live from Passion or whether that's a Maverick City kind of capture or whatever it's an elevate. Like there's like what they would like that to be what they experience on a Sunday morning. And so one way to think about that is these guys are the best at making that kind of content that brings you in and then helps you visualize how you can then lead your people in that way. I know that you listened to that interview with what's the name of the guy again he was the kind of he's the behind the scenes from Maverick City.
Oh, Norman
Uh,
Jumphy.
yes, yeah. So I know that you listened to that interview where he was talking about how they, in those, early 2020s area, they were like, we're going to lean hard on making these videos, or whatever, right? So like that's often what I think about in my mind now. But if you go back 5 years, obviously that wasn't necessarily them, but it was Passion releases, right? It was like those captures of what happened at the Passion event. It was those captures of what happened at a Bethel service. So they would clip out a 5 or 8 minute section of their, I don't know, 90-minute worship service, whatever it is. And then those things become viral. So people are consuming these things, and they're not thinking about it rationally, they're experiencing it. And they want to then be able to help lead people. Not all people, but obviously a preponderance of people. They want their congregations to be able to be energized and to be passionate, right? And so it seems like these guys are producing something that's able to. Anyway, this seems like I think one of the primary reasons that these particular brands were successful was because they were able to kind of capture and then transmit not just the content of their songs, but the energy, the context of their songs.
The aspirational dynamic is really interesting, right? Because we think in the local church that we're picking songs because of what the theology is, right? Or what's maybe good for our spiritual formation as a community. But there's probably more of an influence of this sort of aspirational, these are the pros, and we want to sort of model or mimic what they're doing so that we can have those kinds of experiences here. I find that really fascinating. Go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, well, I was just going to speak a little bit to like the historical nature of it. I'm not the historian on our team. That would be Dr. Adam Perez. He's our resident historian. But the things that Mark is describing aren't new. Like even the concept of a big four, like there used to be a big three, right? You had your Maranatha Singers, Integrity Music, and Vineyard. You had a big three back in the early years of the development of this kind of genre of music. And I think even with that, going further to what Mark was just talking about, the idea that, Passion's releasing these live albums, Bethel's releasing this live music. Live albums aren't new either. Live albums have existed, since the 60s, the 70s. Lots of live albums have occurred. So I think just thinking about, yes, all these things exist now, and there are different factors that are making them more influential or more accessible, or at least especially the visual element. The introduction of YouTube in the 2000s and its impact on our ability to, in the 60s and 70s, it was all of a sudden the ability to hear what was happening in other worship spaces. And now we can see what's happening in other worship spaces. And I think all of that, again, it's not new, but with the introduction of all of this new technology, we have a greater access to what other churches are doing, especially these larger churches that have the funds to support like nice video production and all of these other elements that allow us to see what's happening in these other contexts, which I think in and of itself, we can aspire to sound like. But I think to Mark and to what you were just saying about aspiration, I think there is a strong desire for a lot of churches, whether it's the worship pastor or whether it's the pastor telling the worship pastor that they want to be more like what they see on these videos of Elevation and Bethel and Passion and Hillsong.
So it might not be that the big four write the best songs. It could be that they're the best at marketing themselves.
It would be like so crazy to be able to be like, but who are actually the best songwriters, David? It must be them, right? Like who could prove that? Who could prove who's the quote unquote the best songwriters? It's just, I mean, the best songwriters are probably not writing songs yet, or they're probably not writing songs that you're hearing, right? Like it's not, of course it's not that, right? It's just more like how are any, and listen, that doesn't mean that these aren't great sons. One of my rules here is to say I lead these songs. So if you look at the song
Sure.
lists that I led last night, I led Elevation Song, I led Maverick City Song. Like, I lead them. I'm not just a pusher, I'm a user. And so less people think that there's any hating going on. But of course, yeah, of course not. That, like, how could anybody say that they're the best songs? There are mechanisms. And so to your point, I think near
Yeah.
the beginning, you were like, but people feel like when you talk about mechanisms, you're basically saying the Holy Spirit's not involved. And that's a big sticking point, because it's like, if you can explain how something happened through material means, then in a sort of a God of the gaps type argument, therefore there's not that there's no God, but there's no God working here, right? And
Yeah.
so, I
Right.
understand that. I do resonate with it, but there has to be room for both understanding. Like, if you could understand, was it when Jesus broke the bread that the extra bread came out? Or, like if you could get down to figuring out how it happened, would that mean that it didn't happen? Like, I was reading somebody the other day talking about the idea that um, the manna. Apparently, some people would say that the manna was some stuff that people actually have. It's almost like a naturally occurring thing that happens in that neck of the woods. So what? Like, that's still pretty cool, right? Like,
Right.
that doesn't mean that wouldn't mean that God isn't somehow responsible for providing this natural food that people were able to get. I'm I'm going a little bit off, but hopefully you see the point, which is it's okay to take a look at material causes, even if those material causes are social or economic. It doesn't mean that God isn't actually able to use these songs. So for some people who are allergic to the fact that it's like, now I can't use these songs properly, it's like, that's not what this is supposed to be telling you.
Yeah, and if anything, I think it can empower the underdog, or it can empower the small local church. It can empower the worship leader songwriter that's outside of these influential systems, right? To be able to look at historically or systemically, like, this is how movements rise, this is how songs can spread. If you just say God did it, well, then it's like, well, I guess God didn't choose me, right? Like,
Right.
God didn't want to prioritize my gift to the degree
Mm.
that he wanted to prioritize, the Bethel songwriters. And that's a narrative that I think can be damaging to the local church. Rather, it should be, hey, it's great how God has used Bethel, but you know what? God has something for me as well, right?
Sure.
Um,
It's good.
this is great. Let's talk about the 2020s now. Okay, so this kind of leads us into, we're halfway through the 2020s, so the story is still being written. But based on this article, what are we seeing now in the 2020s that's different than the 2010s?
Yeah, so we've got a forthcoming article that'll kind of go into all the different caveats and different angles kind of that we did with our first article that we ever wrote. But our most recent article, what it focused on was specifically the songwriting narrative of who are these songwriters. And we did that in the 2010s, and we looked at that a little bit further than what we had originally done. And again, we saw it was a lot of big four people writing with big four people, right? They were all kind of in their silos, kind of writing mostly with themselves within their groups. And the big thing that we revealed, though everyone wanted to focus on the very last thing that I said in that reel and the very last thing that was said in that article. But the main thing we were pointing out with this most recent article on the 2020 songwriters is that the shift has been from these kind of siloed writing within groups to this broader family of individuals. So what we see are a lot of collaborations coming across the aisle, across these groups, writing with one another, which, yes, was happening before, but now we're seeing it in the songs that are being most sung in churches right now based on, CCLI top lists. All of these artists are really operating as a family. I mean, we've used Phil Wickham's video twice now where he, names Bethel and Elevation and Brooke and all these people and says it's just a family. And we finally were able to talk about the 2020s and go, yeah, it really is this more integrated network of people that maybe regardless of their affiliation, are working together to write songs for the church instead of these groups that are writing songs and releasing them kind of within themselves.
It appears to me that Passion, Hillsong, obviously, because we kind of know the Hillsong story and what kind of happened there. But even Bethel have kind of taken a back seat in terms of influence to Phil Wickham, Brandon Lake, even Elevation has sort of become this behemoth, right? Is that an accurate sort of perception?
I mean, in a lot of respects, our article highlights this, but I think it's like 13 songs that Brandon Lake's name is on. So again, the songwriter picture is a little bit different than maybe what, our new article coming out in a little bit will say, because the behind the scenes, I think, shows more influence than maybe necessarily what's out there. And Brandon Lake with 13 songs, I think we said that was like one in every four songs this decade has included Brandon Lake, which I think just shows his impact. And same with Phil Wickham. His name was on at least, I think, 10 of our songs. So I think both of them in particular are just highlighting even further this idea that, yeah, there were a big four, but now because it's kind of turning into more of this family collaboration picture, there's less of an emphasis on that. And I think that's why we know more individual names like a Brandon Lake, or if you think about Elevation, they've started even naming like who's featured on their albums. So these individual people are starting to become, maybe I wouldn't necessarily say more important, but they're definitely becoming more prominent as individuals, more so than in the 2010s in particular.
Yeah, and in that Jackie Hill Perry reel that I referenced earlier, it's funny. Again, this just came out last week, and she's talking about, the idea of the big five churches or whatever. But the only church that she names by name is Elevation, because I think that anecdotally, that's the one. Like they are the one that
Yeah.
has continued to keep their influence has probably, although I can't say this for sure, but probably grown actually into the 2020s rather than kind of waned on the other side. So.
Can we talk about Brandon Lake a little bit? This was
Let's
I
go.
remember commenting on your reel because one of the things you said in the video that you made was something to the effect of that he kind of leapfrogged institutions and then that helped him rise and then sort of became one himself. Talk about and again, this isn't like a moral judgment about Brandon Lake, but just talk about how he was able to become what he is today.
Yeah. I think the important thing to highlight is that Brandon Lake didn't really come from nowhere. He wasn't just a random guy who just started writing music and people
Right.
listened to it.
Yeah.
He signed to Bethel. He was a part of the Bethel Music Collective in 2019 and then left Bethel. I fact check me on this. I think it's 2020. And he got signed to Sony as an independent artist. So he kind of went from being connected to one of the big four and kind of leveraged that in some sense. I think his Gratitude album was released with them. His first solo album was released with Bethel. And then he left. And because of Bethel's influence and connections, which helped him get connected with groups like Elevation or with groups like Maverick City, with those kind of groups, he was able to leverage kind of some of those connected, not necessarily in a negative way, not leverage in like a bad sense, but was able to kind of utilize those connections to elevate himself to the point where there are a lot of people on Bethel's roster that people have no idea who their names are, unless you actually like follow Bethel. But you cannot follow Bethel or Elevation and still know who Brandon Lake is right now. And I think that's mostly the point of he had these connections kind of in the early end of 2010s, beginning of 2020s, and now we're halfway through the decade. And if you were to name who are the big artists right now in kind of the worship sphere, I think, Brandon Lake's name would come up. And it's not because it's, Brandon Lake with Bethel or Brandon Lake with Elevation, though he collaborates with them a lot. I think people just know his name, period.
Yeah, and it's been interesting even seeing him move even beyond like the church into the mainstream music industry. with the Jelly Roll collab. It's this, this bouncing around, which is, to me, when I see it, it's just, so the narrative that you mostly hear is, wow, look how God is using Brandon Lake. Sure, praise God for what's happening, but it's also like, wow, like these are incredible business moves to see how he's able to just, he has the look and the talent and the ability to sort of move into all of these spaces and to be influential. And I don't know, I just find him, it's a fascinating kind of case study from a local church worship leader to like global superstardom, and how someone gets there,
God's hand. God's hand.
It's all God. So is Brooke Ligertwood the only good female songwriter on the earth today? Can you answer that for me?
No. We've also got Mia Fields. She's also in there. Yeah, obviously, I mean, it's funny. We should maybe air the laundry here a little bit, because we're just like, why is everybody angling that this is like the thing to comment on? It's literally the title of the article in some respects, right? So we have to own the idea that's worship's bracket, mostly male power players. We are, not all of us are necessarily wired to court controversy. And it's not our desire, but we do notice that you don't get eyeballs on things if you just put out bar graphs without any kind of, sass. So some sass needs to be required. And so, I mean, Shannon will be brilliant with these numbers, but the interesting thing is, when we first started looking at it, I thought, well, it kind of seems like a female influence has gone up. It almost looked to me at first blush pretty dramatically in the last little bit. I was like, it seemed like the 2020s was like, come on, egalitarianism, like we're all the way there. But what was it, Shannon, that actually made it that when we actually kind of looked at it, we're like, oh, maybe this is where analysis plays a bit of a key role rather than just kind of taking the first numbers?
Yeah, what we looked at total number of songwriters, and then how many of those songwriters in this, decade so far, how many of them were women? And you look at it and you go, wow, there's a good number of women. It's more than we've had in the past. That's nice. And kind of when you look across kind of all of the songs, you're seeing at least one woman on, I think it was at least like 25% of the songs. There's a good number of women present. When you actually look at the ratio to men to women, it becomes way different. The picture more or less kind of flips in an instant. So when you look at the ratio, you may have one woman in the writing room, but the rest of the room is 2 or 3 men. So when you look at this broad picture of how many women are being involved per song, yeah, there's one woman in a lot of these writing rooms. But when you look at the big picture, how many women are actually being involved is significantly smaller. I think we found, looking at like how many songwriters across the picture, just looking at, again, I'm our numbers, our data person. In the 2010s, there were 33 women. And in the 2020s so far, there's fewer songwriters, but there's 23 women. So it's kind of about the same. But when you look at the whole picture, both of those numbers are less than 25% of the songwriters.
And
so that means fewer than 1 in 4 are women that are being involved in the writing process of these top songs.
And this was like, this generated the most negative feedback on our social media responses. And for all kinds of reasons, it's a Rorschach experiment opportunity, just to be like, what do you see here? So some people saying like, so your solution is some sort of DEI hire where make sure that you have an equal number of women and an equal number of all ethnicities involved in every single songwriting room, or this is what you guys want, right? Like, hashtag woke kind of showing up in the comments. And then on the other side, it's like, well, of course, because women shouldn't be allowed to learn how to read, right? Like there were like literally people who were just basically like they shouldn't have, like they're lucky that we let them come to church. Like really, like genuinely, kind of like people who are like, okay, your wokery is a bit much, to people who are just like, and I don't think they're trolls either. I mean, maybe they are. Who knows? It could be a Russian bot farm, but people who are just basically like, of course not, right? And so, admittedly, when we bring up these numbers, it is not just facts. Like we are clearly, if you read it, even in the article, we do bring some values. So even though the five of us don't necessarily share, complete worldviews, all of us think it'd be nice if women were more equally involved in the songwriting process. Now, it's not because we would think if only more songs written by women, then the world would be, candy canes and rainbows and everything would all be solved. But it would just be like, it doesn't really make a lot of, what is it telling us, the fact that the industry seems to be primarily male driven rather than a little bit more shared together? And I think that's a question that we can't really answer, and it's not really our job to answer, but it is our job to be able to kind of lay the facts forward and say, hey, what does this say about you? And then that's why individual congregations are going to say, it doesn't matter to me. In fact, like the people who made the comments that I alluded to, they're happy as clams that it will continue to, if it continues to remain that way. But then other people would say, oh, I didn't realize that that's necessarily how the breakdown is. What could we go ahead and do about that?
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think Kelsey McGinnis has talked about this a little bit, where it has to come down to the local church level. The research that you're doing is really helpful for local churches to be able to see things clearly, to understand how the industry works, so that we're just wide awake to whatever sort of injustice that might be there. That's not to say we have to reform the industry. Sure, we could, but I would venture to say that the industry is always going to industry. It is a
Sure.
money making system. It's designed for profit. It's not
Mhm.
designed for diversity, for a plethora of voices. But that
Mhm.
does tell us something, when what is shaping the theology of our songs, when there are not women voices present, when there are not Asian worship leaders present, or African American songwriters that are present. I mean, I know Chandler Moore is amazing, but there are so many others that could contribute to our songwriting that we're just not seeing. And maybe part of it is these movements probably don't see themselves necessarily as, we're sort of trying to create this equitable global church cacophony. They're probably just, we're just doing our thing how we know how to do it, is what I would assume. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to also just name, as you were kind of alluding to in a sense, is there's a lot more similarities than I think people realize between the music industry and the worship music industry. And I think this is one of them. There has been studies. I think I read a study, I think it was out of USC, who looked at the number of women being involved in the production of music more broadly. And the numbers were
Mhm.
similar, like very, very little female involvement. Not none, right? There are women who are involved in the producing and the writing of songs, but it's such a small number. And I think, to your point, even though we look kind of like the music industry, well, why is it probably more important to think about this, especially in the context of songs that are being written for the church, to what you were saying? And I don't know if there's an easy solution for this, but if half the church is female and less than a quarter of women are involved in the process of writing these songs, then where is the female voice in the songs that we sing if it's not coming from those writers of the songs that we're singing? Again, half by women in the church.
It goes back and forth in weird ways, of course, because you'll hear, I think Kelsey Kramer McGinnis herself did write an article, what, about a couple of years ago, about the evaporating male voice in the church. So what's a weird thing is like, the idea of the quote unquote feminization of worship music. So it'd be so weird to think the idea that most of the people who are leading are females, if and most of the songs being written are male. Like I personally, I'm just like, this is me, Mark, not the Lord. But like the idea of like always trying to chase some sort of like a complete and utter representation of all people, it can be, uh, it's a good thing to remind ourselves of, and it would be a completely exhausting thing to constantly try to get towards. Not just exhausting in the sense of tiring, but possibly exhausting as in like literally evaporate the energy in the room based on it. But it's always good to know who's not there. Also, I think people hear us saying that the people who are writing are nefarious people who are constantly trying to squeeze everybody else out of the room, and that is not in any way what we're trying to say. So a friend of ours who's not in WLR, but uh, certainly an associate, Annalie Let-Thiessen, her doctoral research was on the idea that um, one of the primary reasons that worship songwriters are more male than female is due to remnants of things like the Billy Graham rule. Some people would know this, the idea that Billy Graham was reputed for, and you know what? So far, apparently relatively scandal free, even after his death. I mean, I'm sure he's said some things. We've all said some things, but he's not. There's a lot of people who, after they pass on, we discover some terrible things about what's happened in their life. Not the case for Billy Graham, and one of the reasons is because he was apparently just like voracious about making sure that he was never alone with the woman. And so this rule, which was popularized long before he passed away, was something that evangelicals have imbibed. I'm a pastor at a local church. I have imbibed this rule. But the conversations are coming up now in our local context as well. We're going, but is this actually is this tenable? Like, can we really genuinely never? Because what this does is creates almost an animosity between the genders. Like we're like need to be defensive against one another as opposed to kind of collaborative with one another. So it makes sense that people would not necessarily be like, and then maybe we'll talk about the Pinnacle example that just happened, that just got released a little while ago. But when people get together with their friends to write songs, their friends are going to be people of the same gender, maybe even of the same worldview. Maybe not, but probably, because that's what friends are, right? The people who have affinity and they just kind of hang together. So it's not like we're saying these are terrible people, and by any means, and not even just that like they have like bad plans. However, it's looking like if we are just left to our own devices, this is a system that will perpetuate itself probably over time.
It's kind of funny to see kind of the reaction
Mm.
and the reality at the same time. So thinking that it's still primarily male dominated. And one of the critiques of a lot of worship music is that the language is so
Mm.
feminine. I find it fascinating that it's mostly
Yeah.
men
Yeah.
writing a lot of songs with like more feminine or more emotional kind of language. And then, we look at the reaction to that, primarily men writing with this kind of language and style, now reacting and maybe reacting, thinking of Sons of Sunday that has kind of a group of men that kind of embrace that more like strong masculine figure that want to write songs with more of that kind of
Mhm.
language, which is just interesting to see the reaction of men more or less reacting to men necessarily like these women who are coming in with all of this type of language. It just struck me for the first
Mm.
time that it's men reacting mostly to men, which I just find humorous.
Classic.
Yeah, I mean, worship in and of itself is emotional, right? So just at its very foundation, it's sort of tapping into your emotions. Sure,
Mhm.
it's cerebral too. It's theological, but worship demands a response of your body and your
Mhm.
voice. And so to try to go full masculine with it is like it's a bit of an imbalance, I think.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! But there are quote unquote masculine emotions, though, right? Like, are we looking for more anger in our worship? Are we looking for a little bit more righteous indignation? Like, is that? I mean, like, are we looking for like a psalm? Because I mean, like, people could write some Babylonian kind of like how can we sing the songs of our motherland while we're over here in Babylon? Like let's smash some babies. Like people could have some anger like that, and that could be. Is that what we mean by masculine emotion in songs? I'm sorry, dude. You were going to throw something against the wall, and I really want to know what it is. Hopefully, it's not a baby. Hopefully it's not.
No, I mean that's true, and I've been exploring some of that. I've had some conversations recently about how militant worship can be co-opted politically. even if it's not what the writers intended, right?
Yes.
Because of just the polarizing nature of politics, especially in America, I'm sure in Canada as well. But it is front and center for everybody. And so to have militant worship songs in a minor key that's talking about, taking back ground, you can filter that through American politics in a way that's like, wait a second, that is actually very dangerous. But anyway, what I was gonna say was, and tell me how this resonates with you. When an industry, right, the definition of industry, right, is money, right? Like that's the goal of it, is to generate money. And so when industry drives worship, you're going to look for the collaborations that have had success in the past and will warrant you more of an opportunity to succeed, right? You're going to be less prone to maybe take a chance on a young writer or a writer who hasn't had success than you are Brooke Ligertwood, who wrote What a Beautiful Name. If you get her in your collab, there's a greater chance. Not only is she kind of a global superstar in the church, but she's also a really great songwriter who has written some hit songs. So there's sort of this industry that sort of feeds itself whenever there's pressure to produce. There's pressure to create hits. Churches need lots of new songs all the time. It's a machine you got to feed. Then you're naturally gonna, okay, let's kind of keep shrinking these collabs down just to be people at the top. Does that resonate at all?
It's hard to say if that'll be true for the rest of the decade. Because again, I think what's tricky about the article that we just released and its data is that we kept our threshold high for who makes it onto the visualization, because including everyone isn't helpful. It's a mess. The names are too small. You can't read them. Like, actually visualizing that isn't helpful. So to allow for a comparison with the 2010s, we kept our threshold at least 3 songs. And so because of that, names that people may be thinking of, I think Abby Gamboa is a great example of that, didn't appear in our visualization. However, there are multiple names that are involved. I think what you don't find is a critical mass. And that's not to say that one won't accumulate for the rest of the decade. I think keeping in mind that the beginning of the 2020s, we were in the middle of COVID. It's a lot harder to write with someone you don't know if they're not in your circle when we're all trying to social distance. Yeah, you can Zoom co-write, but it looks different, right? So I think there's probably a bit of an impact of that on the songs that we're seeing on our list at the beginning of this decade. But I do think we're starting to see, again, because it's less institutions and more of a family, I think we're starting to see some people being brought into that family that aren't affiliated with those big names. Now, are they eventually going to become big names in and of themselves? I don't know, but we are seeing some names across the whole list that are appearing that weren't there in the 2010s. So 2010s was, I think, a much more consolidated picture within those institutions. And this family, I think now in the 2020s, is more open than maybe the institutions were in the 2020s or in the 2010s.
What happened to Matt Redman and Jason Ingram and Jonas Myron? I mean, those guys are still writing. You still see them on songs, but I feel like they've taken a little bit of a back seat to these young bucks.
I don't know. My inclination on that is I think the people they primarily wrote with just aren't as prominent now. I think Jason Ingram wrote a lot with Chris Tomlin. Chris Tomlin kind of took a step back, went kind of more the producing route with his label. Similarly, Jonas Myron wrote a lot with Matt Redman. Matt Redman kind of took a step back a little bit. You haven't really seen a lot of albums come out from him. So they're, a Jonas Myron and a Jason Ingram, they're still present, but they're present in a different way. The finding new people to co-write with, and maybe those songs and those people that they're co-writing with maybe aren't as prominent as the big names like a Matt Redman and a Chris Tomlin were in the 2010s.
Plus, worship is a young man's game anyway, isn't it?
I mean, it would appear to be, yes.
I mean, how old is Stephen Furtick? Like what? These are
I just always remember hearing like,
Stephen Furtick.
essentially you age yourself out eventually. But I don't know how old is Furtick? Would he be in his 50s?
No. Look it up.
He
Right here.
We're
on
gonna
this one.
Google
He's
real
got to
quick.
be like
He'd be-
42.
is he 45?
45.
Oh, okay. There you go. Yeah. I remember always people being like, he doesn't really, why is his name on all this stuff? I was like, he actually, like, he really is a writer. Like, he really genuinely is a writer.
which I think is also interesting that the pastor of a church, because that's unique to Elevation, which I don't know if that's, the reason why they're successful. But of the big four, they're the only ones that had their lead pastor writing on all of their songs.
True story. Yeah. I mean, the Houstons were obviously very heavily involved in, but I don't know that his name got on any actual credits. So no. And then obviously the son. It's interesting. Yeah, the Houston kids were really involved, and then the Johnson kid was real involved. But it doesn't always pass from generation to generation. But yeah, interesting. I wonder if Furtick's kid is writing. He's got to be writing.
Well, I think Furtick was a worship leader first, right? So he was doing all this before. And I would venture to say he's probably the best songwriter at Elevation. This is just, again, you guys speak from actual research. I speak from just observation of what I see.
Well, here's
in
what
this world, but
you can't see, like, when you see a songwriting breakdown. I mean, David, you've been in, I'm sure you've been in some of these rooms. Like I've been in songwriting rooms where it's like, here's the deal in advance. It's going to be 25, 25, 25, 25, or no, we'll actually assess afterwards whether you get 5 points, or, hey, you're in the room, so be like your name. And so you get, so in other words, there are people who are justifiably skeptical about whether or not Furtick is actually involved like that heavily in things, whatever, because you can just get a songwriting credit without being a songwriter. But my understanding is that he genuinely is a good writer. That being said, unless you're in those rooms, one will never know exactly what percentage of the actual, creative process is actually directly coming from him or anybody else in the room. But
yeah, when I think that's also song dependent, I have spoken with people and interviewed some people at Elevation, and some of the stories that they tell do involve or even start with Stephen Furtick had this idea. So some of the songs originate with him, but I do think even just knowing that, I think he ends up being a bigger contributor than maybe some other pastors who maybe have an idea, kind of offer some advice, and maybe have a line or an idea and pass it off and still have their name on it.
yeah, because doesn't Giglio have some songwriting credits?
Yes, I think
How Great
he's
Is Our
on.
God?
I want to see on How Great Is Our God.
Right.
Yep.
Right, but I don't know. Is he actually a musician, or because I think they used him as like a theology kind of a gatekeeper in some respects on their
Buffer.
content. And now I'm speaking outside of what I know, just what I've heard at this point in time. But yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I want to dialogue a little bit about Sons of Sunday before we go, because it's just like fascinating to me. What is your perception of how Sons of Sunday has been received so far? I mean, I have some thoughts on it, but do you think it's been like generally positive, generally kind of negative? Just how's it been received kind of in the church and in the industry?
I don't have very many thoughts on it, just to be honest with you. I haven't looked into it enough to have much of a. I try not to. If I don't have any thoughts, why would I say anything? Shannon, do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. To be honest, I'll just put it this way. In a lot of my circles, no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of put it that way. I think what's interesting is that the way that they've marketed their music is this is the stuff that they wouldn't let us write for church, so we're going to write it and release it here. Which then makes me go, then who's it for and what's its purpose? If it's not intended to necessarily be sung in church. So it kind of feels more like a passion project than necessarily these other like worship artists that are like actually trying to write corporate worship songs. But that's just kind of my like cursory read of it.
What have you been hearing, David? What have you been seeing?
Well, I mean, it seems like the general reaction I mean, you have one side, I feel like the fans, right, of all of those superstars are just going to fawn over it. Just like, oh, this is amazing, right? But I saw
Sure.
there's just a lot of like poking fun at it, I feel like on the other side, where it's like, come on guys, seriously? Like you guys are all the most successful songwriters and you're just going to get together, right, and wear like tank top. There's just like seemed like there was just like, are you serious? Sort of
Mhm.
reaction to it. Like, come on, was this actually necessary? Like, do you guys need money from this or whatever? Kind of a thing.
Right.
So it's just interesting to me, and I kind of liked how your article sort of tied in as we're talking about this sort of lack of female representation, and here's this Sons of Sunday, this male kind of dominated collective.
It was too
It's just
perfect. It was
interesting.
just like
Timely.
they were just like, oh, here you go, like, you can use this. Yeah,
Perfect
but
timing.
but but again, like, neither of us are like, oh, they shouldn't do it. Like, they can do whatever they want. Like, and
Yeah.
so I think some people make comments like, nothing's stopping a bunch of women from getting together to do the same thing. I'm like, I think what the French word for Sunday is? Dimanche, and so it could be the daughters of Dimanche. Um, and you're absolutely right. They sure could. I don't know if they would have the money behind them to promote it at this point in time. But again, even if that's true, even if the system is set up in such a way that they wouldn't have the budget, um, that's saying nothing, in my opinion anyway, and I think Shannon shares it. That's saying nothing against the idea that that these guys getting together to hang out with their bros and write songs, like, they shouldn't have done it. Do whatever they want. Of course. The question is just like, isn't it interesting that they do, like, the airspace was available for them. Like, they were able to move into this space, whether successfully or unsuccessfully, only time will tell. But there was like there was a platform. There just doesn't seem like there would have been a platform because we know that the women songwriters exist. Maybe they just didn't feel the need, or they just, and that's also okay. It's just interesting. I don't know. There's nothing to say beyond other than to me, isn't that something?
It is something. It is
It's something.
definitely something.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, what do we do with this information? Let's kind of land this plane. So, for local church, pastors, worship leaders, songwriters, how do we take all of this kind of industry chaos, dynamics, structure? How does this infiltrate practically into our lives? Any thoughts?
My starting point with all of this is just raising awareness. I think the worst thing we can do as worship pastors, worship leaders is put our heads in the sand and pretend we don't know about it. And so I think making ourselves aware of just the system that we're engaging with, whether we like it or not, we're engaging with the system. And I think just being aware of it so that way you are making informed decisions about your church practices. Because at the end of the day, and I've said this on other podcasts and other conversations, worship pastors are the gatekeepers of the songs that we sing in our churches. They just are. They're the ones who create the CCLI Top 100 list. The industry doesn't, we do. And so I think just being aware of that to make informed decisions, not necessarily needing to be meticulously looking at, who's writing all of these songs every single time, but just knowing that women aren't writing a lot of songs or that it's becoming a different kind of industry now than it was. So my biggest thing is just always being informed as worship pastors to make informed decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. Um, I would say that you don't have to, you don't actually have to respond to everything that you see. So contrary to the so at the beginning of the video that was associated with this reel, um, sorry, the reel, the Instagram reel that's associated with this article, Shannon is playing chess. And as she's playing chess, and Shannon knows how to play chess. Shannon knows how to play chess better than I do, I'm sure, because my 13-year-old beats me all the time. Um, while she's trying to deliver this content to the screen, how she has a script involved, all those kinds of things. She castles. Castling is even like, you need to know chess to even know that castling exists, because this is like weird boutique move that you can do where you move the I don't even know, the king moves or whatever. It doesn't really matter. She does it wrong, apparently. And the amount of people who commented to let us know that Shannon castled wrong is just a really simple point of order to say, it's actually okay to see something and not say something. Now, listen, hear what don't hear what I'm not saying. There's a lot of times where if you see something, you do need to say something. But actually, sometimes you can, it's kind of a mental health hack in the 21st century. So sometimes just to receive information and realize that's actually not something I need to deal with. Knowing what you need to respond to and what you don't need to respond to is actually a great way for you to stay healthy, and also for you to be able to spread a little bit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and goodness into the world. So some people are going to see this data and they're going to know, you know what, I need to encourage the people in my church to write more. You know what, I need to make sure that I'm paying a little bit more attention to where my money is going. I need to this and I need to do that. Some people, though, are going to go, you know what, I'm actually fine to just keep doing what I'm doing. I'm fine to keep allowing the songs that my church has been singing to keep singing those ones, whether it happens to be from a hymnal or from the top 100. I'm fine. I'm fine to keep doing that. So don't feel like, and this is where you're at. Don't feel like you need to dramatically change everything that you're doing or completely, as Shannon said, bury your head in the sand and think that everything that we've said is terrible. There is room at the table for you to respond to this and all the information that you get in various ways.
So good. And I'll just add one final challenge to the senior pastors. Because, Shannon, something you said is the worship leaders are the gatekeepers to the songs that we sing. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I also think that there's senior leadership that sees what the big four do or sees these worship tours. And they say, we need to do that in order to grow, or we need to kind of mimic that at our church. And what I would say is, because I know there's worship leaders that are maybe wanting to experiment with some different kinds of songs, some different sorts of practices in church. Be open to that conversation with your worship leader. Don't feel like you have to only do the most popular songs in order to have successful worship. Be open to some different things. Allow some creativity. Allow some local church songwriting, even if the songs aren't as good as the big ones. I think that's healthy to allow that to sort of take root in your community. So, it's Mark, Shannon, this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, man. Always a good time.